So I'd like to talk a little bit about a scripture that is found in Genesis that is often quoted in wedding ceremonies. It is one that is often left open for interpretation, but I would want to offer some of my perspective on it. As somebody who is approaching his 5th year in marriage and has had his share of learning experiences over the last 5 years of being with my wife, and nearly 6.5 years of knowing her kind of from an intimate perspective. And that scripture is from Genesis chapter 2, verse 24. It says, "Therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother, and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh." Let me read that one more time. "Therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother, and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh." It's often interesting because some translations will say that they will leave their father and mother and cleave to the wife. And I always wondered, what in the heck does cleave mean? It's an old King James version of that particular scripture, but when you think about cleaving, there's something specific about that. Marriage is supposed to be a place of vulnerability and transparency. When God was saying this, you have to remember that initially when God created mankind, when he created humankind, there was supposed to be an intimacy that was between God and humankind, such that they would be able to be in close relationship with God. There shouldn't have been any separation. And what ended up happening was that when Eve bit of the fruit from the knowledge of good and evil, it created a separation. God was always a being of relationship. God has always intended for relationship. And what happened was that relationship was severed the minute that disobedience entered into the Garden of Eden. But God created Adam and then created Eve subsequently to be his helper, his helpmate, to be a spouse, to be a life partner. And it would suggest that God was intentional. There was an intentionality about why God created Eve for Adam. And we can argue and speculate about whether it's Adam and Eve and all of these other things. But the point of the matter is God had a specific plan for relationship. So there's supposed to be a vulnerability and a transparency and a relationship that is supposed to be bonded between a husband and a wife. That's why the scripture specifically says that a man leaves his father and his mother to cleave to his wife, because the initial relationship of bonding that a child has, and in this particular scriptural example that a man has, the first bonding is between him and his mother, and subsequently him and his mother and his father. And so in order for him to create a relationship or to bond to his wife, he has to leave or sever ties with that particular bonding in order to make himself available to create an intimacy with the wife that he has now pursued and has taken as his spouse. And so cleaving means that you have to fully respect each other, you have to enjoy that intimacy, and you have to put time into researching your spouse such that you can know them intimately, inside and out. And so when you take a look more closely at this, cleaving to your mate means that forsaking all others. You know, when we were getting married, we had the pastor who was officiating our wedding said, "Forsaking all others till death do us part." Forsaking all others, I mean, a lot of times people, specifically when they focus on that phrase, forsaking all others, they think about not defiling the marriage bed and not going and cheating on your spouse. Well, cheating on your spouse doesn't mean that as a man I have to go and find another woman to go and sleep with, or another woman to go and spend time with. Cheating on your spouse can also involve anything that is going to take away from the intimacy that you are supposed to be building with that particular spouse that you have chosen. So you have to be dedicated to your spouse. You have to be able to keep that relationship vibrant and healthy. And forsaking all others means that you have to stop allowing other things, other relationships to draw away the time that you're supposed to have, and instead invest that time in building and establishing a healthy and vibrant relationship with your spouse. The other thing that cleaving means is that you have to continuously research. Like I was saying, you have to, it's an ongoing exploration of who they are and what makes them unique. We should never stop learning about our spouse. Never. There should never be a part or a time where we stop learning about our spouse. We should always feel like if I am not learning something new about my spouse, that I am neglecting my responsibility to continue to research my spouse. The other thing that I think cleaving or bonding to your spouse is, you have to have a deep level of intimacy. Your mate should feel like there is such vulnerability that they can have around you that only with you can they be like that. Okay? So when you're forsaking all others and you're cleaving to them, that means that there should be such a deep level of dedication to one another that you can be completely and utterly vulnerable. If you remember in the garden, what happened was that when they ate from the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they were embarrassed because they had no clothes. A husband and a wife should be so comfortable with one another that they should be able to shower together, be naked in front of each other. That is one of the things that you should be able to share with your spouse, where you can be so vulnerable like that and just allow yourself to be completely free in front of them. That's the level of vulnerability you need to have. The other thing cleaving means is mutual submission. Now, I know that the Bible talks about the husband being the head of the wife, and Christ being the head of the husband. And I do believe in biblical submission. I do believe in that idea, but I'm not going to dive into that right now. But I do think that even though there is an order established in the household, Christ, husband, wife, children, although I understand that order, I do believe that a husband and wife have to have mutual submission. A marriage doesn't work unless the husband also submits to the wife in much the same way the wife submits to the husband. And let me touch on that for a moment. It is that we don't devalue the other. Each of us have to look at one another as equal in value. And when we view each other as equal in value, there's a competition almost to see who can serve the other more. Who can serve the needs and the desires of the other more? And when one person is submitting to the other and engaging in this activity of trying to seek out the needs and the desires of their spouse, and the other is not, it's going to leave one of them feeling very alone in the marriage. So there has to be mutual submission in that regard. What often happens is that one person is engaging in it, and then the other is kind of halfway doing it, and that's what creates tension in marriages. And look, I'm not a marriage expert. I'm just using this particular scripture to really dive deep into an understanding of what this whole idea of cleaving really means. Because I hear it often, but I never really thought about it in greater detail until I really started to break down the word cleave. And then the last thing I think is you have to be exclusive. So That, I guess, is kind of self-explanatory. When we say forsaking all others, it means that you're fully and exclusively with this person. I do believe that marriage is work. There's no two ways about it. But I also believe that marriage should be enjoyable. It should be a pleasure to be with the person that you're supposed to be with for the rest of your life. There should be pleasure there. And I think what often happens is we have, in our culture, we have turned marriage into a chore. It's almost a joke sometimes because people say, oh, you've been locked down. And we say it jokingly, but I think that unfortunately what that does is it creates a very uncomfortable tension that somehow marriage weighs you down. That's why you have people that get divorced. It's like, they miss being single. And I'm not saying anything against people that are single, but what I'm suggesting is that we've turned it into something that is such a chore that now it becomes, instead of being enjoyable, it is something that doesn't create joy. We ought to delight in this relationship. We ought to be able to be pleased to be around our spouse and to offer our full selves to them. And so when I go back to this scripture idea, when I go back to what it means that a man will leave his father and mother and hold fast, cleave, it's holding on. We hold on to the things that we love. That whole concept, if you love something, let it go, and if it comes back, I don't like that. No. If I love something, I hold on to it. So going back to it, Genesis chapter 2, verse 24, therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. That development of oneness, it comes from that exclusivity. It comes from that transparency and vulnerability. It comes from that enjoyment and mutual submission. It comes from all of those things when we say that we're going to cleave or hold fast to our spouse. And so what does it mean to cleave? Well, I just think that it's sharing with your spouse on a deeper level and being dedicated to them and only them. It doesn't mean that everybody else doesn't matter. It just means that the priority and the focus is on your spouse, on the needs and the desires of your spouse. Like I said, I'm no relationship marriage expert. I'm just going based on what I know, what I've experienced, and on deep reflection of the scripture from Genesis chapter 2. Because I think Genesis chapter 2 verse 24 it's deep, but there's some simplicity in the practical application. So hopefully you guys enjoy that. Reflect on it. Men, reflect on it. Women, reflect on it. Genesis chapter 2, verse 24, therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, or cleave to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. I hope you remain blessed.